Rick Grenell's joining us right now, and Rick, of course, served as the acting director of national intelligence. He was also the ambassador to Germany. He is a senior advisor to the American Center for Law and Justice. He's part of our team. Rick, I want to go right to the situation in Iran. It's interesting. Let's first give a little bit of an analysis of what has exactly happened here.
Well, look, without getting into any intel, which will be difficult for me to talk about this subject with my previous background, but let's just be clear that let's talk generally. Iran is the number one state sponsor of terror and terror financing. And what that really means is that this is an Iranian regime, the current government, which is supporting terrorists in Europe, supporting terrorists in the Middle East. They fund Hezbollah, which is causing all sorts of problems in Europe and in Lebanon. And so they've got a long history of secretly supporting terrorists and using that money to develop weapons programs, which we know through the great information that the Israelis have been able to uncover, that the Iranian regime lied to the previous Obama-Biden administration. The Obama-Biden team believed the Iranian regime and what they were saying in terms of the number of centrifuges and the depths of their program. And what we found through the Israeli information is that the Iranian regime was lying to us. So part of the reason that the United States decided to reimpose sanctions on the Iranian regime is to cut off that funding and that money that keeps going to further weapons programs. There's an individual who is a scientist who is one of the key people in Iran that has helped develop the nuclear weapons program. And he was killed this past week. And all of his work spearheading these terrible programs, which are destructive and geared towards terrorism, clearly take a hit as well. And so it's a very good thing that this individual is no longer walking the earth. Let's be very clear about that. And the reason why is because he has used his scientific skills to help support the terrorist regime that is the Iranian regime that has been killing innocent people around the world and targeting Israelis and American allies.
All right, Jordan, I know you've got a question. I got a follow-up for Rick, but I'll let Jordan, you go ahead first.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Rick, you picked up on a tweet from someone who had your position before, John Brennan, who sent out an immediate tweet saying this was a criminal act and highly reckless. It risked lethal retaliation in a new round of regional conflict. But this is the key point you picked up on. Iranian leaders would be wise to wait for the return of responsible American leadership on the global stage and to resist the urge to respond against perceived culprits. And a lot of people picked up and said, isn't that the same kind of or maybe even more, Logan Act violation that, now that, of course, Lieutenant General Mike Flynn has got the pardon, but still had to spend millions of dollars in legal fees, unfair courts, conducted, was put together by Obama, Biden, and yet they've got their former acting DNI saying, hey, wait for your response while the Trump administration's in office.
Yeah, it's really outrageous, and people should go and look at the exact transcript from Michael Flynn, which the Democrats said was treasonous and problematic. The transcript was very clear. Mike Flynn said exactly what we would want someone to say who's an incoming national security advisor. What he said is, think about what you're doing, don't escalate, and remember that there is just one administration at a time. Now, John Brennan went completely further in his analysis and said to the Iranian regime, you should wait. You should only deal with the incoming administration, not the current administration, because it's going to be more rational. Now, that is explosive. That is one of those things that we know John Brennan has been supporting. He always always comes down on the side of the Iranian regime. And we have to ask ourselves, why is it that John Brennan, every time there is a moment when the Iranian regime should be under more pressure, we can always count on John Brennan to relieve that pressure and give them aid and comfort in the international space. This also is a very alarming message to the Europeans who want to do business with the Iranian regime. You know, let's just take a country like Germany that I know well. The reality is that Germany has a Germany-first economic model. They want to be friends with everybody and sell everybody every product and service that they can. And that includes China, that includes Iran. And so there are concerns that the Europeans are going to utilize this moment and immediately engage with Iran and try again, once again, this strategy of engagement where we believe that if we just would sell products to Iran, the Iranian regime would somehow see the light and begin their walk towards democracy and the rule of law. I will just add one thing. We tried that 20 plus years ago when we had the Chinese enter the WTO. We believe that engagement would work. We believe that if we engaged the Chinese, that somehow they would start to move towards the rule of law and democracy and capitalism. That failed. The engagement strategy with China has failed. They should not be in the WTO. And I don't believe that you can have a long-term engagement strategy without a very good benchmark of constantly evaluating every 6 months, every year,
right,
on whether or not your engagement strategy is working. If it doesn't work, back off.
You know, it's interesting to me because I followed the situation too, Rick, with John Brennan. And of course, we have an office in Jerusalem, so we do a lot of work in Israel. But this idea that John Brennan is now again cozying up to the Iranians, which of course was John Kerry's whole approach to engagement with the Iranians. The president has been very tough on Iran. Iran is crippled economically. And the most recent actions of taking out the bomb designer who created havoc both in the Middle East and, remember, U.S. individual soldiers were killed by this guy because the Iranians use other regimes as proxies. And the idea now that we've got John Brennan of all this, like the ghost of Christmas past, coming back here and now spewing his policy views. This is exactly why, folks, at the ACLJ, we are doubling our efforts now more than ever to combat this. We are going to be your voice with people like former Ambassador Rick Grenell, former Director of National Intelligence, and others, that we can speak out on this. Rick, Jordan, you have one last question for Rick?
Yeah, I mean, Rick, I think this is just kind of it's a preview of what to expect if, we talked about the legal challenges. This is not yet over, but if the Biden administration gets in, it's a preview of what to expect. You keep talking about the idea of compromise and how compromise puts America last. And it seems like we're racing towards that kind of foreign policy if Biden gets in.
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, you look at Ben Rhodes' tweets lately, and he's now completely openly mocking the motivation for the Abraham Accords and for trying to have peace with Israel's neighbors. I mean, it's an openly disgusting rhetoric that somehow Jared Kushner is getting paid off by the Saudis and by others for what work he's done. This is, I think, the danger of an Obama-Biden return, Biden-Harris return, because what we're going to see are people who are hostile towards Israel and who want to govern the world by consensus, meaning that the United States policy must be watered down by others in order to have it good, which is how we got this weak Iran policy from the last administration. And pallets of cash were given to the Iranian regime, which, as you know, is brutal, denies human rights, pushes gay people off buildings, denies Christians their fundamental rights. It's a terrible regime that should not be funded.
You're absolutely right. And Rick, you mentioned the horrific nature of their human rights violation. And as you know firsthand, we represented a couple families that have had Christian pastors in Iran being treated by those regimes. So this is that's why we're fighting back, folks.